Every bit of your unique identity taken over to plunder bank accounts, credit cards, maybe even commit a crime in your name. How big a problem is this? Well, at least 8,000 victims a year in Canada of what's being called identity theft. Until now, it's been treated merely as another form of fraud, but this is no ordinary crime. These crooks take over your very life, your driver's license, social insurance number, bank cards, credit, everything that defines you as a unique individual in our modern-day world. And once they've become you, there's no telling what your evil twin might do. It looks like moving day at this suburban home in Mississauga, Ontario. But these aren't the movers. They're undercover detectives, and they've arrested the homeowner, and they're now seizing everything in the house.
High-end electronics, plasma TVs, large screen TVs, computer systems, stereo systems. The house is all top end. You name it, it's name brand, they've got it.
A Giorgio Armani, Hugo Boss, Versace,
Mont Blanc, Chanel, Bulgari.
About $200,000 in high-end merchandise, and it's all ready for resale. Proceeds from a shoplifting ring? The neighborhood cat burglar? Well, not according to police. This is a new crime wave.
It's identity theft. They have obtained fraudulent credit cards using other people's identity and use those credit cards to buy this stuff.
So how does identity theft work? Well, in many ways, it's like a game of chance, a game of cards. And as always, the odds are stacked in favor of the house, in this case, the identity thief. Now, the first thing he needs is your name, your address, and your mother's maiden name. And it's easier to get than you may think because it appears almost every day in the newspapers under the birth announcements or marriage announcements. Well, once he's got that information, the game begins. The first thing he does, goes to a government office and gets a birth certificate. Well, with that piece of information, he goes down the hall to another government office and gets a social insurance number. Once he's got those two pieces of identification, the game moves a lot faster. He moves down the hallway, gets a driver's license. The difference being, it's your name on the driver's license, but his picture. Well, with that, he may go down to another office and get a health card. With these basic pieces of information and identity, he, in effect, becomes you. And with that, the game really goes into high gear. He gets credit cards. He can go to the bank and get your bank account. At that point, he's won the game. He takes your chips and then moves on to the next deal. Identity theft is the fastest growing white-collar crime in this country. It's increasing at about 55% every year. Fraud detective Joe Pendleton of the Edmonton Police explains why.
The average identity theft of a live person is worth, on average, about $20,000 per identity to the bad guy. That's pretty big money. We got a guy who walks in and takes $20,000 this afternoon from the Bank of Montreal on Jasper Avenue. It's front page news. $20,000 from your account, it may not get reported to the police. Basically, we see two different paths to identity theft. The one is the account takeover, which involves live people. The other situation is what we call tombstoners, or the dead child method.
Identity theft can start with a walk in the cemetery. Police call this method tombstoning. The thieves pick out the names of dead children and then create a new identity. It's the preferred source for organized crime and terrorists because it's almost impossible to trace. Next stop, the public library. Detective Pendleton will show how an identity thief checks for more details in back issues of death announcements in the newspapers.
This particular obit has caught my eye right away because of the length of it, which means there's probably quite a lot of information contained in it. I'm born in 1957, so I want someone born around that age. This is a very well-intentioned family. They put in a lot of information for their loved one, but unfortunately for the family, they've included his date of birth. Now, if I'm an identity thief, that means I don't even have to visit the cemetery. I've already got another additional piece of information that I require. From this source alone, without doing any additional research, I can recreate this identity. I could be filling out an application for a birth certificate for this gentleman right here within 25 minutes.
Tombstoning may be the way to create a new identity, but the way to get rich quick? Take over the identity of a living person. It's called account takeover, and we are all at risk.
We all exude information, whether we realize it or not. That's part of interacting with our environment. But that is basically what the identity thief takes advantage of. And he's not picky. He'll pick you at random, hoping that you've got a good credit rating. He'll pick you at random, hoping that someone else hasn't picked you.
And that's what happened to Craig Fanning. Fanning is a traveling salesman from Sudbury, Ontario, and he got a nasty surprise when he was filling up at his local Canadian Tire.
I went to pay for my gas. The girl asked for my card back and said that it had been reported stolen. I phoned Canadian Tire office and asked what was going on. They actually said, we've been trying to get a hold of you. And I said, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't been anywhere. You would have been able to reach me. And I had apparently called, or who they thought was I had called, and said that they had moved to Winnipeg, that their card had been stolen, that they needed a new card sent to such and such address in Winnipeg. So they just went ahead and sent them a new card.
The thief had rerouted his credit card to a new address and then went on a 6-week spending spree.
He began to travel across the country with my card. He has upwards of $18,000 in purchases, and I still haven't totally sorted everything out, but as you can see, there was many pages of statements, cash advances, etc., etc. So it was quite extensive.
Craig Fanning's identity was hijacked by one of the most notorious con men in Canada. Brian Wood has a 25-year record for fraud and identity theft. For 3 months in 2001, he was crossing the country on a cocaine high, courtesy of a dozen unsuspecting victims. $18,000 from Craig Fanning's Canadian Tire card alone. But he wasn't about to stop there. He then got control of Craig Fanning's MasterCard.
It was a couple of weeks after the Canadian Tire incident before we realized that he had also got a hold of a MasterCard. He was so brazen again as to go into Canada Trust and change the PIN number, presumably using my driver's license or my name on the driver's license as ID, and actually went in and changed the PIN number, so it became his personal card.
Brian Wood got another $5,000 from MasterCard before he went on to his next victim. He looked for men of similar age and build, and in Winnipeg, computer analyst Ron Neusetzer fit the profile.
I just returned from a business trip to Regina, and I came in late that night, and my wife was checking on the computer the accounts just to do the weekly budgeting. And she remarked to me, what do you spend $5,000 on the Visa for? What was that all about? Is that your trip? I said, no, I used the corporate card. And she said, well, what's these charges? I said, I have no idea. We contacted Visa, and they started rattling off a bunch of charges. Was I ever in Toronto? Was I ever in British Columbia? Well, this is wrong. Something's gone terribly wrong here. And they went off the line for a long time and came back and said, you need to speak with our fraud manager.
On Ron Neusetzer's Visa, Brian Wood redecorated his home. He bought high-end pots and pans, towels and sheets from Eaton's. He even sent flowers to his girlfriend. Ron Neusetzer is usually mild-mannered, but he was incensed that someone had stolen his identity. So he did a little detective work on his own and traced his name to a phone number in Toronto.
So we decided, well, let's see if this number is for real. And we gave them a call, and an answering machine picked up, identifying the person as myself, right down to the company that I worked for, and they weren't available at the time, leave a message. And almost to a T, it's the same message I'll have on my phone here in the office.
And how did that make you feel?
It's strange. I mean, we don't have a common last name. So to hear that, it's like, this person has gone to a lot of work to be me.
The police arrested Brian Wood in Vancouver, charging him with impersonation. His victims were all compensated by the banks and the credit card companies, but it wasn't just a matter of money. Regaining control of their identity was an uphill battle.
We went down to the folks that issue the social insurance cards and told our story. And they didn't believe the story at all.
So how long did it take you to convince them that you were who you were?
I believe we had around 3 two-hour meetings before I finally convince them that my story was real, and now they would process my application for a replacement social insurance number.
But it took Brian Wood only about 10 minutes to get that same card.
He knows the system, how to work it far better than I do.
I just had in mind that I just came from a multi-million-dollar prison.
Yeah.
And can you tell me to turn that off? The interview hasn't started as far as I'm concerned. Okay.
It's part of the con man's game to try and get something out of any situation. Watch as he hustles us for a better location for the interview.
I like to sit down at a table and chairs and talk. Oh, an interview room. Like sit down at a table and chair and ask me the questions that you want, and I'll answer them.
So we play along.
If I'm going away for a 5-year sentence, I want to do it in style, right?
Here in British Columbia, Brian Wood was charged with 3 counts of impersonation. He says he really doesn't have to find the victims because they almost come to him.
People give away too much information. From putting your name in the phone book, I can open up the phone book. You can start with that. You've got the name, the address, the phone number. You can get the postal code. With a few phone calls, you can find out where the guy works. Then from there, you can go to a credit report. You can make up a few pieces of identification.
When you went out looking for victims, who were you looking for? Is there any standard type of victim?
High income. People that had they could get a lot of credit. You know, if I got your Visa number, I can punch it in, order up 10 $500 gold bars, that's $5,000. Have it delivered to a mailbox. Voicemail number, hi, this is Tom Clark. I'm not home right now, but I'm waiting for them gold bars. Should be in any day now. You know what I mean? It's not gonna end. It's gonna get worse, and it's gonna get worse, and it's gonna get worse until something is done, like seriously done about it.
Detective Joe Pendleton of the Edmonton Police is well acquainted with Brian Wood and sees little chance of him going straight. At the moment, there's not a lot to stop Brian Wood from doing this again.
No, the loopholes and the weaknesses that exist in the system, at least here in Canada, are the same now as they were 5 years ago, 20 years ago. So unless those loopholes are closed up by the institutions that hold the information or that control the enforcement, then I'm afraid that there's not much hope of stopping Brian in the future.
Criminals find loopholes because there is no single card that positively establishes your identity. Each card is regulated by a different provincial or federal government department. For police, this is a multi-jurisdictional nightmare. But for criminals, it's a dream come true and a fast track to what Brian Wood wanted most.
I wanted more cocaine, so I got good at it. I got really good at it. I didn't want a quarter gram of coke. I wanted a big bag.
And identity theft could get that for you. That's what you're saying.
It was quick and easy. It was quick and easy.
And above all, easy.
Well, it is easy. It is easy because they make it easy. The banks don't want to stop it. The credit card companies don't want to stop it. Nobody wants to stop it.
And in fact, the banking and credit card industry loses tens of millions of dollars to identity theft every year. They even budget for it. But they prefer that to annoying their customers who may move to the competition if they're inconvenienced by stricter security measures.
If you look at this crime, more than most others, it really does expose a lot of the weaknesses inherent in many of our systems. Looking at this from a criminal's point of view, the crime is very easy to commit. And if you have trouble figuring out how to commit the crime, there's a whole bunch of books out there for under $19.95 will tell you exactly how to do it. And I'm told for all intents and purposes that they're legal.
He's talking about books like this, Reborn in Canada. It gives a step-by-step guide on how to steal a Canadian identity. And it's easy to get. Just order it from this website, Loompanics Unlimited. It lists its address on the U.S. West Coast, in Port Townsend, Washington. Loompanics Unlimited publishes many counterculture books intended, it says, to shed light in dark places. But they weren't very happy when we tried to shed some light on them. W5 asked for an interview with the publisher, Michael Hoy, but he refused. So we went looking for him. The people at his office weren't very welcoming. So we dropped by Michael Hoy's house.
I have no interest in talking with you. Go away, get off my property.
So we went looking for the author, Trent Sands. And we tracked him down to, of all places, the land of fantasy and fakery, Las Vegas, Nevada. Trent Sands, author of Reborn in Canada and 6 other books on identity theft, was happy to talk to us.
Yeah, actually, Reborn in the USA has sold about 40,000 copies in all its editions.
He told us that he's a Canadian with a PhD in nuclear engineering. But with all that apparent education, he wasn't that smart because he tried to con us as well. But this book, what's the point of it? Is this a how-to book?
Well, in some ways, it's a how-to book. I mean, it's one thing, if you're going to explain how this is done, and how the government does it or an individual does it, be it the criminal or whatever, you have to show the steps that are done, because the steps, if the government does it or if you or I would do it, are exactly the same.
So this book then is for what, a criminal, somebody trying to escape justice?
Well, it could be, but it could also...
terrorist?
A terrorist could use it, or it could also be for a woman who has been in a bad marriage, who's been abused, who's tried to use the system and now but keeps getting found.
Why would you want to write a book that could be useful to a hardened criminal or to a terrorist? What's the point of that?
Well, I mean, when I wrote the book, I mean, this book was written 10 years ago. I had no conception, of course, the events that have happened since then.
But that's not stopping him from writing a new, updated book on identity theft. So just who is Trent Sands? He's also written under the name John Q. Newman. But that's not his real name either. We were about to catch him at his own game. What's your real name?
Well, I'm not going to discuss that on air because of the nature of the books that I write.
But you write under the name of Trent Sands.
Right.
What other names do you write under?
John Q. Newman. Actually, I think those are the only 2 as of right now.
Are you Brent Edward Wade?
Yes, I am.
So as Brent Edward Wade, you wrote Reborn in Canada,
Right.
Reborn in the USA,
Right.
and a number of other books.
Right. Actually, I don't. Can we cut for a minute?
Well, what's the problem?
Can we cut for a minute?
Why?
Because if we're going to do this interview,
Yeah.
then I need to set some ground rules.
Well, I'm a little bit confused because as Brent Edward Wade, you were telling us that you're a Canadian, that you were born in Canada.
Right.
But you've got a removal order against you from the Canadian government. Are you aware of that?
Mm-hmm.
And in the removal order, it identifies you as an American. Are you an American?
I'm not gonna. Okay, that's the end of the interview.
Brent Wade turns out to be a criminal, not a university professor with a PhD. He has a record with the Las Vegas Police Department for fraud under 12 different aliases. The master identity thief didn't much like it when his real identity was finally exposed.
You want to go make that?
A criminal teaching other criminals makes Detective Joe Pendleton crazy.
Makes me nuts. It makes me nuts. But, you know, I've been doing this for 23 and a half years. Lots of stuff makes me nuts. You work with it. And what I'm hoping...
Detective Pendleton thinks there is only one solution to identity theft.
I personally am a proponent of a national identity card, which I realize really raises the hackles of those people who are passionate about privacy.
But some people might say, look, I've got my SIN card. Isn't that my protection? Isn't that my national identity?
Many people mistakenly consider the SIN card as the de facto Canadian identifier. And nothing could be farther from the truth. In the absence and in the vacuum created by not having a national identity card, it has increasingly been used more and more and more for purposes other than which it was designed. I carry a wallet full of cards. In fact, as you can see, Tom, my wallet's literally breaking with cards. And I think I'm average of most Canadians. Now, somehow I managed to carry all these cards without feeling violated, without feeling that my privacy is violated, without feeling that I'm not Canadian. It doesn't seem reasonable to me that you would be afraid of your government and its institutions and the police more than you would be afraid of Brian Wood. And I'll tell you right now, a national identity card would shut Brian and his associates right down.
A photo ID card similar to the one that Brian Wood wears in prison. Would that stop you from what you were doing?
Immediately.
You couldn't operate, you couldn't steal
couldn't.
identities if we were all carrying something like that.
Perfect. Yeah, it would be perfect. I couldn't commit the offenses that I did.
In the meantime, Brian Wood is in jail, but he'll be back out on the streets soon enough.
Take care, eh?
And it appears that he's already planning his next scam.
Next year, I'll be driving this thing.
So what can you do to protect yourself? Well, the one bit of advice we got from both victims and police is buy a paper shredder to keep the details of your life as secret as you possibly can. We'll be right back.